Alright guys, welcome to the last lecture on Unit 6. I want to start with your outline for the week. We have a very short week this week. You have 3 assignments. The first assignment is to watch the video, do your journal. Your second assignment is to read on the Turner thesis. There are only 5 questions on the Turner thesis. Super quick assignment, and then you have your unit exam. The unit exam I am going to open on Tuesday for you. It'll close on Wednesday by 11:45, which is the longest I can have it open on forms. So know that sometime between Tuesday and Wednesday, you'll have to submit your exam. Also, do not forget to we don't have class on Wednesday. We're not logging on for Zoom. That's why the 2 assignments will be posted, one on Tuesday, one on Wednesday. You can decide to do whichever day. I would suggest doing the Turner thesis before you take the test, as the Turner thesis is on the test. All right, all assignments, like I said, are due Wednesday at 11:59 because we don't have school on Friday, so they can't be due on Friday. Quick reminder, as of Monday at 11:59, your extra credit is due if you're deciding to do that. And once you complete those assignments, you are on Christmas break. All right, let's get it moving. Let's talk a little urbanization. Urbanization is the movement to the cities, the growth of the cities. To become urban means to become more of a city feel. So, urbanization, movement to the city, growth of the cities. Urban means city, rural means agriculture, suburb type of deal. So, what was the appeal of the city that was drawing people in, that was forcing them to move there? It's the American dream. It's the opportunity. It's the idea that if you move to the city, you could get a job in a factory, rise through the ranks, maybe own the factory yourself one day, all about opportunity. Factories were new, they were interesting, they were different. A lot of people from the South and from the West are going to look at factories and say, well, this is a change of pace. Maybe we could try that out. The glamour of the city. We had art museums, we had theaters starting to pop up. This is going to make it seem very interesting, very different, more of a quick pace. There's more people there. The culture seems to be different. So people will see it as a glamorous lifestyle to be able to hop on a trolley train and ride through the city, go to the art museum, go to the theater. And that's going to draw people in as well, away from the suburbs where there isn't much to do. Transportation, huge draw. You could take public transportation. You could, towards the end of this Gilded Age, you could have your own car. That fast-paced moving from place to place easily is also going to draw people in. And the idea that you could change your social standing is going to be a huge draw for people. A lot of people will move to the cities to try to get that rags to riches story that you read a couple of weeks ago, trying to go from whatever class they were born into a better life. And immigration is going to increase hand in hand with urbanization. We're going to take a look at that in just a couple slides. So, what are the negative effects of urbanization? Well, first of all, housing. The amount of people moving to the cities is going to come at such a quick pace that housing will not be able to develop slowly. It'll develop quickly. There is zero regulation on what housing should look like at the time, that there should be smoke alarms, that there should be bathrooms for every apartment. So when they do build up, they build up in the cheapest way possible, in the fastest way possible. And this results in what we call tenement housing, which were very small apartments that often housed a large number of people. Tenements are going to be the very popular style of living for people who are mass migrating to the cities because they don't have a lot of money when they get here. They can't afford a large house or any large facility to live in. So they're going to live in these tenement housing developments, which are often one bedroom apartments. Everybody on the same floor shares a bathroom. The kitchen, bedroom, living room, everything is all one bedroom, or is in all one room. So very cramped housing, which we know leads to uncleanliness, a quick spread of disease. It could be disastrous if there is a fire. And that leads into the other two pieces that you see here: water and sanitation. Plumbing was not a first priority in the cities. So, because of that, you're going to see people dumping their waste out on the streets. And there is no trash pickup, there is no street cleanup. When you look at that first picture that's posted, that is a dead horse in the street, and those are children playing around it. Nobody was coming to pick that up. It was going to just decay over time because there was no sanitation workers like today, where we have trash pickup, where we have people to clean up the streets. That didn't exist. So the cities were extremely filthy. And fires and crime. Because of the buildings being built so close together, because of the cramped nature of the city, if there was a fire, that could be devastating for whole city blocks. Not just one small building might get burned. No, that fire would spread very quickly. And until we start using steel as the main component of buildings, many are going to be made out of wood. And when the cities would burn, the fire departments, they're not fire trucks coming down the street speeding down as the fire engines. These were run by horses, or they were run by people. And oftentimes, fire went with crime. When a building caught on fire, people would loot it as it was on fire. And there was so much corruption within the city that some fire departments, when they would go to come, they would go really slowly, depending on what part of the city it was in, allowing for the looting to happen. And the crime, you're going to have many different gangs within the cities. Immigrant groups are going to form gangs. Nativists are going to form gangs, and they're all going to be pitted against each other within the cities. So this will result in the fighting of the rival groups. You also are going to see lots of crime in that there are no street lights. There's not a lot of open police force roaming the streets monitoring. So there's going to be a lot of looting. There's going to be a lot of stealing off of people, pickpocketing, things like that, and not a whole lot of organization at the governmental level to stop that. All right, let's talk a little positive. Enough with the negative. Transportation, going to be huge. You're going to see trains, trolley cars, connecting the different parts of the city, making it quick for transportation, giving it that fast paced lifestyle. Skyscrapers are going to quite literally build up the cities with the mass production of steel, lessening how much steel is. You're going to see much more buildings come out of that, much more skyscrapers, taller buildings, because now they can be sustainable. Bridges, the Brooklyn Bridge is going to be a piece of art out of this time. Once we start building out of steel, you're going to see bridges connecting not only throughout the cities, but throughout the country, places that we had not been able to build across before. It doesn't really bode well to build a very long bridge out of wood. So the steel is going to make our bridges longer, stronger. The positive, more entertainment. You're going to see museums, theaters, art galleries, libraries, things that we didn't really pay much attention to, but now that we have these very wealthy groups of people in the United States wanting to give back, many will give back in the form of the arts, which develops these cities into that glamorous place that we were talking about. And also hospitals. You're going to see more attention be paid to the building up public medicine, and within the cities, you'll see the development there. So a little bit of positive. Class structure, not just within the cities. This really does apply to the whole country, but we're going to look specifically at the breakdown of the three class structures within the city. You are going to have a large lower class. This is going to be the largest part of the population within the cities. This is going to come up with the factory workers, and it'll be a struggle to get out of that lower class because there is very little skill. You have to think this is a time where education was not mandated, that it wasn't necessarily readily available either, because whole entire families are going to need to work in order to pay for just the very basics of life. So it doesn't leave a whole lot of time to go out, get an education, to rise through the social classes. There's very little social mobility at this time. The middle class is going to be just about non-existent. The only members of that middle class really are going to consist of the management within these big businesses. So, not a ton belonging in the middle class. The only other class that we see is the wealthy class. And this number always mind boggles me every year that I teach this, but it is that 10% of the population controlled 90% of the wealth. So you have a very small amount of people in the wealthy class, but the gap between the rich and the poor is so large because the wealthy class, that small number of people, is holding the majority of the wealth in the nation, not just in the cities. And like I said, a good majority is going to belong to the lower class. And that gap between the rich and the poor is going to spell disaster as we move forward in U.S. history. But know that it exists, and it is an extreme gap. You have Rockefeller, Carnegie, Vanderbilt, those wealthy families that have millions of dollars. And then you have the lower class who are quite literally working for pennies on the dollar, pennies a week. And the differences between the two classes is very stark. Okay, let's talk immigration. This idea you may have seen last year, push-pull factors. Push factors are what force immigrants out of a country. Pull factors are what draw immigrants into a country. So the push factors of the groups that we're going to talk about: famine, war, persecution. I put war on there twice because it's so important. Religious intolerance, meaning that they could not practice the religion that they followed in their country for fear that they could be killed. They could be mistreated because of that religion. And economic poverty. A good example of that is the Irish potato famine. That's going to hit economically, and it's going to hit in the idea that people were starving. These factors where they create a very tumultuous situations in their native lands will push people out to seek safety, to seek opportunity elsewhere. Pull factors: opportunity, go to the cities, get a job. That's going to be a huge draw in. Change the situation that you have found yourself in your nation. And religious freedom, having the safety to practice whichever religion you would like without fear of prosecution. Land, the idea that you could own your own land and be your own creator of your own fate. And political freedom. the idea that there aren't warring kingdoms, that you may be the byproduct of a conflict, is also a huge draw in. And the Industrial Revolution in and of itself, remember, this is called the Gilded Age. The United States is looking fantastic to the rest of the world, and people will see that and be drawn to the United States because of it. So we've got three phases of immigration that we're going to talk about. The first two are a little bit of review. The third is what we're really focused on during this time period. So, phase one, colonial immigration. Who were they? These are going to be colonists coming from England mainly, but you can see, as on the map, that there were other places that colonists came from, and these are going to these people are going to come in the 17th and 18th centuries, which is the 1600s and 1700s. Why they came, their push-pull factors that pushed them out of their country and drew them in. It's going to be the promise of land and prosperity. Remember, the colonists, many of them were running out of space in their current country, and they wanted to leave and have the opportunity to own land, more land, and be successful in farming, things like that. To escape religious persecution, think of the Puritans. They want to show what was wrong with the Church of England, coming here to illustrate that a different religious life would be successful. Where do they settle? Along the eastern coast of North America, from North Carolina to Maine. That's really where we're looking at here. And the difficulties that they faced. First, famine. Remember the colony at Jamestown, the failure of the first colonies in the in the colonies. Because they didn't understand the land. They didn't know what they were doing here. It was very different than where they came from, and that's gonna spell out difficulties for them. And the conflicts with the Native Americans. It will be constant and consistent that the colonists faced off with the Native Americans for land as they expanded, even knowing the Native Americans were here first. That push that the colonists give to kind of invade their land is going to create conflicts that we see over and over and over again. So the difficulties faced, mainly famine, the learning of the land, and Native American conflicts as they took the land. Phase two, we call phase two old immigration, or the WASP, the White Anglo-Saxon Protestants. So who were they? They were mainly Irish, British, German, and like I said, known as White Anglo-Saxon Protestants. When did they come? They came between 1840 and 1860. So this is going to be the very beginning of that Second Industrial Revolution, right before the Civil War. And when the Civil War begins, think about the draft that was given during the Civil War in the North, where many of these immigrants settled. So when they're in for the first couple of decades that they're here, they're met with the Civil War. So maybe it's not their best choice when they came here. Why did they come here? The push factors: potato famine, religious and political prosecution, and instability within their own countries. And then they're faced with the Civil War. So we weren't the most stable at the time either. But we offered some kind of opportunity here. Of course, we had religious freedom, and we looked to be stable before the Civil War. Where they settled, they're going to settle in rural and urban areas, so a little bit spread out throughout the United States. They are going to come here to work hard to build a life for themselves, whether that meant in the rural or urban areas. It is all about coming here and finding opportunity. The difficulties faced in this group, not many. They're going to be able to easily settle into American culture. Many of them are going to come as families, or they will have families here already, which presents a better picture to the Americans. Because their families are not single men coming here, which often uh, is depicted as dangerous. Plus, think about the groups that are coming. We had Irish, British, German. I hate to say it this way, but they look like Americans, okay? When you put these people together with those that were already here, they don't look much different than us. They don't, I mean, German is a very different language than ours, but uh, it, many times the British, they sounded like us. So it wasn't such a far off look for these immigrants. And that's really how people judged at this time. If you could speak like the Americans spoke, if you looked like the Americans did, then you weren't a threat, you weren't different. So this group isn't going to face difficulties in that aspect, and families are a lot less intimidating than single men coming to America. All right, phase three. Phase three, we know these phases as the who are we, Southern and Eastern European. Okay, Southern and Eastern European. So we are going to see the Irish, the French, the German, the Polish, the Italians, Austria-Hungary, you're going to see Russian, Swedish, so many different groups coming. You're also going to see the Japanese and the Chinese coming at this time. Very diverse in both language and religion. We are going to see Catholics. We are going to see Jews. We are going to see Eastern Orthodox. So very different religions than that, the Christianity that we're seeing in the United States, Catholicism. Very different, seen as very different. Judaism, seen as very different. These religions, these languages are going to cause a stark contrast between the Americans, who are going to call themselves nativists, and the new immigrants coming in. But I need you to lock in your brain, new immigrants coming from the periods 1880 to 1920 are Southern and Eastern European. So the when is the time period between 1880 and 1920, so that real chunk of the Industrial Revolution there. Why they came: religious persecution, economic and political instability, the pull factor, especially at this time. Look at that map up there. Where are they going? They're going to California, and they're going to the cities on the East Coast. That is it. They're coming right to the industrial capitals where they can find jobs and where they can find a new life. What they did, they moved to cities. They're looking for the industrial jobs, and that's going to cause issue with the Americans that are currently there. The difficulties faced, they are going to create fear in America. And we're going to talk about this more in just a second, but they're going to create fear in that they're looking for jobs that now Americans are competing for with immigrants that they do not like. And they are going to compete for the opportunity of that rags to riches story. And that's scary for Americans. They thought they had enough competition already, and now we have this mass migration here, immigration here, that they have to compete with. They're not fans. So the reaction to immigration, nativism. Nativism is a belief that native-born white Americans were superior to newcomers. Nativism is going to be extremely present during this time of mass immigration due to the idea of xenophobia. Xenophobia is the dislike or fear of people from other nations. Many Americans are going to believe that they are better than any immigrant coming here, and they are going to fear all immigrants and what they could do to America upon their arrival. These beliefs are going to develop as a reaction to the stark differences in culture and religion between the native born Americans and the immigrants that were coming in. These feelings are also going to develop because these immigrants coming in were competing for jobs and housing during a time where the economy was starting to delve into a recession. We're headed straight for an economic depression in the 1880s. Okay. And when we see a recession, we start to see a cutback in jobs, we see a cutback in wages. And when that's happening, that creates more competition. When you have more people competing for less jobs, that is scary. And that's going to cause a lot of these feelings in the United States. And it's going to be a cause for the formation of the Know Nothing Party. This party is also known as the American Party, and this political party forms in opposition to immigrants coming to America. So you can see today maybe the same arguments are being had where immigrants are coming to steal our jobs, when really immigrants are coming to have the same opportunity that we were just born with here in the United States, and they had to sacrifice their life for in other nations. Um, so, really, the Know Nothing Party forms an opposition to all of the immigrants coming here, which is going to lead to a demand for some restrictions on immigration. So, the government restrictions that we see. Uh, First of all, when we look at the Chinese Exclusion Act and the Gentleman's Agreement, this is going to be going after a group of people that was visibly different than many of the immigrant groups. Like I said, the Southern and Eastern European immigrants that were coming here, they often looked different. They didn't integrate as easily into society as the old immigrants because they look different. They speak different languages. They had very different religions than what we were used to. And we can see that in the reactions to government restrictions. The Chinese Exclusion Act and the Gentleman's Agreement are both going to target immigrants coming into the East Coast. That's mainly where the Chinese and Japanese immigrants settled. The Chinese Exclusion Act is exactly what it sounds like. The United States was trying to exclude Chinese workers from coming into California at a time where the gold rush is happening. It is more the tail end of the gold rush because it starts in 1848, but still there. But more so for the railroad jobs is what the Chinese Exclusion Act was going after. Many Chinese immigrants worked to build the Transcontinental Railroad and were working in the railroad industry jobs that Americans didn't want to compete for. And the Japanese immigrants are held up in the Gentleman's Agreement, which was an agreement between the United States and Japan, where Japan would withhold any passports of people who wanted to come to the United States and work. Again, trying to decrease that competition in jobs. Literacy Test Act was put into place in 1917, aka the Immigration Act, requiring reading in order to come into the United States. And like I said, this new wave of immigrants is going to speak very different languages, and they're not going to be able to read in English the documents, especially that are being presented to them. So these, we'll get to the last one, then I'll make that statement. The National Origins Act, the Emergency Quota Act in 1921, is going to be passed to restrict the number of immigrants coming into the United States. This one is a big one. Okay, while all of these tried to limit groups coming in, this one set a number, set a quota of how many immigrants could come into the United States from each different nation each different background that they were coming with. To set a quota is to set a number of whatever it is that you're measuring in a whole. So the quota system here set up and said you could not have more than 3% of uh, of Chinese, of Japanese, of Italians in the United States. And once we measured the whole population and found that there was more than 3%, well, then no more could come in. So the Emergency Quota Act targeting specific groups of immigrants from coming into the United States. All of these here were meant to restrict the number of immigrants coming into the United States because of those fears in the competition for jobs, because of those fears of the different, because of those fears in Americans that that developed as more immigrants came to the United States. Theories of assimilation. Remember, we said to assimilate is to bring into the American culture, which I don't even know what the American culture is if it doesn't include all of what immigrants have brought to the table. But these theories of assimilation, we heard assimilation before with Native Americans, where we were trying to bring bring them into the fold of what it looked like to be an American, and here we're going to try to do it with immigrants as well. First, we have the melting pot theory. Think of a big bowl of soup, not chunky soup, but like tomato soup that we're trying to blend all together. That is the key word. Many different backgrounds blending together to come up with what it means to be an American. I love this political cartoon of Lady Liberty stirring together the different immigrant groups, saying equal rights, and what that all of these different backgrounds make what it is for citizenship. What we set up in order to create the melting pot theory, to have everybody kind of blend into one big culture, were what we called Americanization programs. So these literally were programs within the cities where people would go and learn English, where they would go and learn how to kind of leave their culture behind and become what we wanted them to be as Americans who spoke English, who followed the religion that we told them to follow, that was not being Catholic or being Jewish, that you became what we wanted you to become, the melting pot, blending together to form the American culture that we recognize. Now, the flip side of that is the salad bowl theory. Think of a salad. It's chunky. It doesn't blend well together. It's exactly what we mean here. In the salad bowl theory, immigrants would keep their cultural traditions. And this is going to be illustrated by the neighborhoods that form, that are really segregated based on background. They're formed by their country of origin. So you'll see Chinese neighborhoods, Irish neighborhoods, Italian neighborhoods, Mexican neighborhoods, Russian neighborhoods, where they're not intermixing in the culture and they're still living very much so in the culture, the traditions that they brought to the United States. And this creates a fear in America that whatever at the time they defined the American culture to be would be erased by these different immigrant cultures coming in who refused to change, to leave their culture behind and adapt to what we wanted them to adapt to. So you have two very different theories here. The melting pot theory, where we would all just blend together to form this happy culture, giving and taking from everybody to blend together and be one. And then you have the salad bowl theory, where we are very much not blending. We are staying in our own. We are staying separate, and that is where the fear came from. All right, we had to talk a little bit about the American frontier, because at the same time that immigration is happening, we are going to see the American frontier developing as well out west. So, reasons for settlement, we have mining of metals, gold and silver. Uh, this is going to be the first boom in the West. Gold and silver reignited that idea of manifest destiny, where the United States has to spread from sea to shining sea. It really encouraged that westward expansion, and mining towns are going to spread across the West, giving hope of finding the riches quickly and easily. But mining towns would all often boom for a time and then be abandoned when the precious metals were not found. So the West, in some aspects, becomes kind of this ghost land where you would see mining towns boom while people moved there while they were looking for the metals, and then they would die out and move on to the next place where you'd see another mining town boom looking for the riches. The Transcontinental Railroad encouraged the westward settlement because now we can move quickly to the west, where it would take you months in a covered wagon. It could take you days in the Transcontinental Railroad. And a lot of these cities that did survive are going to be stops of the Transcontinental Railroad, aiding in the growth of the frontier. Territories are going to be becoming states at very quick levels here. The requirement for statehood included a population of 60,000. 10 territories are going to meet that 60,000 marker for statehood between 1864 and 1896. That's a lot of states developing out in the West. Um, as the mining industry is going to grow, the need for the railway, the Transcontinental Railroad develops. Congress is going to support that idea, and we talked about the forming of the Transcontinental Railroad in the last couple of weeks. Cattle ranching is going to develop at this time, which gives us that cowboy culture that you see in the movies. Cattle ranching is going to aid in the boom of the West because the West was home to vast acres of land that nobody had claimed yet that could be used for feeding the herds. And people are going to move out there to try to claim that land for themselves. And that's where you begin to see that cowboy culture forming, that battle for the land in the West, the wild, wild West competition for the land develop. And the Great Plains were the last part of the country that were settled by farmers looking for a better life. The Homestead Act is going to draw in these people out to the west. Remember, giving 160 acres of land if you go and work it for 5 years. And we have exodusters, the picture that you can see down there, former slaves settling in places like Kansas and Oklahoma, looking to start a life away from the South, away from the plantation. Exodusters. All right, problems on the plains. You had to be very inventive when it came to farming out in the West because many of the people moving from the south to the west or the north to the west, wherever they were moving from, the land is extremely different, and the way of life had to be different as well. You're going to see people be incredibly inventive when it comes to building houses. They're going to build them out of sod bricks, which you can see there. It's kind of like a dirt packed brick to build the houses because the resources there, that's what you had. Barbed wire is going to be invented for the West because of the vast amount of land that people were claiming. You have 160 acres. How are you going to fence that all? And barbed wire makes it very easy or easier to protect your land and fence it at the same time. Keep your animals in, keep the enemy out. And dry farming techniques are going to develop because, again, this weather condition in the West is not the same as what it was in the South. So the farmers going out there who had anticipated using the same techniques to farm the land, they couldn't do that. So they had to come up with new ways to develop the land. The West is going to become known as the most diverse in both occupation and population. Not everybody's going to go out to the West just to be a farmer. You'll see cattle ranchers. You'll see the miners, the industrial workers on the railroad, all out west at the same time, and the population very different. You're going to have many different migrant groups out in the west, African Americans. You'll see many different groups of immigrants out in the west as well. So opening up the population to be extremely diverse in both what they were there for and where they came from. And the competition for land out west starts to develop as the Homestead Act pushed a lot of people out there, giving away massive chunks of land. They're going to compete for what is left. And it causes, again, that wild, wild west feel that you see in the movies. All right, last piece for today. While we're moving out west, we cannot forget to talk about the treatment of the Native Americans. As we see this push to go to the west, this push to uh, develop land. Land had already been developed out there. Wherever the Westerners were going, wherever these homesteaders were going to, the Native Americans had to be moved again. The Homestead Act is going to happen in 1862, and as we do that, we've mentioned this before. I talked about this a little bit in the last couple of weeks when we were talking about the westward movement. Native Americans again are going to face a violence here. The reservations are going to fail. Remember, many of the Native Americans did not want to move to the reservations. And when we see that happening, we saw the event of Custer's Last Stand, which caused a massive debate in the East. Um, War hawks are going to demand an immediate increase in military spending to move the Native Americans, and they're going to call for swift judgment for the non-compliant natives that were not moving to the reservations. There are going to be many critics of that policy, though, that made their opinions known because when the reservations fail and you see Native Americans being forced to the reservations, resulting in more death, uh, critics are going to come out and be very vocal at this time. What came with the reservation failure, though, we can't forget, is the extinction of buffalo. As we see this massive Western movement, white Americans are going to come in and hunt the buffalo almost to extinction. And that was a pillar in the Native American culture. The forced assimilation of Native Americans, the building up of those Americanization schools, the missionaries that went out into the West to teach out the culture of the Native Americans is going to aid in this movement of critics against the mistreatment of Native Americans. And all of this added up to the most vocal detractor, who was Helen Hunt Jackson. She published A Century of Dishonor in 1881. This was a book that was about the assault on United States Indian policy that really chronicled the injustices toward Native Americans over the past 100 years. Uh, Even though in this book came out, though, many Americans were unsympathetic or indifferent to the information that was being rubbed in their face on the mistreatment of Native Americans. Uh, they believed that there was a systematic plan to end all Native resistance, and that was approved by the American masses. And the Indians of the West would not see another victory at Little Bighorn if this systematic plan was put into place. So, while the book did illustrate this presentation of terrible treatment of Native Americans over time, um, it didn't really result in a change in that movement. It really just kind of laid out the information, and we're still going to see mistreatment of the Native Americans even after this time. And it, what I want you to realize with this book is that we see a voice starting to be given to the Native Americans after 100 years. That's the importance there. 100 whole years. Helen Hunt Jackson, a century of dishonor, laying out the failure of the reservations, the encouragement of travelers to kill buffalo almost to extinction, the assimilation, or the brutal assimilation process of Native Americans, trying to teach out, erase, stomp down that culture. And even then, we don't see a huge change in the treatment of Native Americans. Last piece, remember you have 3 assignments due. You have your journal due, you have the Turner thesis reading due, and you have your exam due, all by Wednesday. And then I hope you have an extremely Merry Christmas. Relax a little bit, take some time away from school. Any questions? Please let me know.